Hello, what I'm trying to do with this presentation is outline some of the tools that I think will contribute to success in students. It's going to be kind of a long video because I think there are a lot of things a student can do to improve their success. So maybe break it into parts, break the video into parts, watch it a little bit at a time. That is, break it into chunks, a technique I will talk about later. The different areas I want to talk about are learning how to learn, various learning tools, time management is very important. Content management is important. Practice critical thinking. You want to improve your ability to take tests, so improve your test taking techniques. You might need to work on your motivation. It's good to have a growth mindset where you realize your failures are something to build on. Won't talk a lot about this, but you need reading skills. Really won't talk about this because there's lots of sources on this, but stress management. And then the last thing is something called play the infinite game. So a finite game is one where someone wins or loses. An infinite game is where somebody improves themselves. And so you want to take learning as not about necessarily getting a grade, but about being a better learner, learning how to learn. I'm going to start at the top center with learning strategies to improve your ability to learn how to learn. Your intelligence and how your brain works is not static or permanent. Personally, I think you can continue to improve learning throughout your life. And this presentation discusses strategies to learn how to be a better learner in the short term and then also in the long term. The first thing to recognize is that there are multiple types of intelligences. This is captured most easily in something called Bloom's taxonomy, and I hope that you've heard that term, but if not, I want to describe it. So there are two types of intelligences in Bloom's taxonomy. There's something called the knowledge domain and the cognitive process domain. Here's a website from Iowa State University where they go through the knowledge domain and the cognitive domain. I'm going to start with the cognitive domain because this is probably the one that's most commonly recognized. Remember means to pull facts out of your brain, so it could be as simple as memorizing the names of bones of your body. Understand means to recognize why there are different types of bones or why the femur is so large, why it grows in certain areas. If you know your bones, why the femur has a trochanter that stabilizes the bone where it goes into the hip. Apply would be to use markings to find areas to inject or knowing the different types of bone fractures. Analyze would be like understanding how the bones at the base of the skull can damage areas of the brain. So it's easy to understand that trauma to the outside of the top of the skull will damage the brain. But you also need to know that since the brain is floating, the brain can actually be damaged by the base of the skull or base of the cranium as well. Evaluate could be understanding how breaking a bone might affect other bones. For example, a horse cannot really survive a broken leg as they can't really take their weight off the leg, otherwise, it damages other systems. And then create is the highest form of learning. It's like designing prosthetic limbs, where you have to create the action of how bones work in human function or how a leg functions. So, in early days of prosthetics, they tried to replicate an arm and replicate a leg. But nowadays, you can see different prosthetics, especially for the legs, that are designed to be more efficient, like a blade. Let's go back up to the knowledge domain. Factual is somewhat like remembering and involves the learning of facts, such as knowing that there are 206 bones in the body. The conceptual domain would be like understanding how bones and muscles work together to provide the ability to walk. So essentially, conceptualization means seeing the big picture or seeing the forest from the trees. See things at the small level, but also see things at a higher level. The procedural domain would be like understanding the procedures necessary to determine if a bone is broken by following protocols that involve feeling for the fracture and then using x-rays to confirm if there is a broken bone. Probably one of the most important one here is metacognition. Metacognition involves knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. And often you don't know what you don't know. And that's really important in school because sometimes you think you know something, so you stop studying and you don't know that you don't know what you don't know. I know that's a little confusing. So, do you think you know your bones for a test, so you stop studying and then you do poorly on an exam? I really like this figure because it shows how you can combine Bloom's knowledge domain with the cognitive domain. So one of the ways to improve your learning is to understand that there's some types of learning that are fairly easy. Those would be down here in the bottom, while there are others that are much more complex. And you can go through this progress in a class, an individual class, or it's definitely going to happen along your program course pathway. The reason to know this is you don't want to underestimate the complexity of what you're being asked to learn. One way to be sure of this is to talk to your instructor about expectations. A specific example is that in A&P, it generally involves low levels of Bloom's taxonomy, like memorizing bones and memorizing muscle names. But when you get to A&P2, I tell my students those are the processes or those are the organ systems that kill you. And the organ systems interact, both one organ system with another, but then also on the basic atomic level, molecular level, organelle level, and on and on and on. And so it's much more complex in A&P2. So a lot of the strategies that might lead to success in A&P1 are not going to carry over into A&P2 because A&P2 requires a deeper level of approach and requires more time. So kind of to extend on this, someone can be really successful in A&P1 by cramming, but cramming doesn't really allow your brain to put away or put together complex knowledge, so it won't work so well in A&P2. So understand there's different levels of knowledge. When you're learning about Bloom's taxonomy or learning your classes, basically what I think it shows, something I often tell my students, is college is not about facts, it's about skills. It's about learning how to put facts together and things like that. I'm going to get rid of this and move up here. A really good source of learning how to learn is The Learning Scientist. There's a book, a website, and a podcast, also images that go through 6 strategies of learning. And you can find links to these 3 sources at www.learningscientist.org. The first strategy is to use concrete examples. This means to put your learning in context and connect facts to visual information. So don't just memorize something, figure out the why of the learning. Hopefully, your instructor is giving you examples of topics in learning, but you also want to try and find context for your own learning yourself. Maybe remember when you or someone you know broke a bone. Next, right here, is retrieval practice. There's a difference between recognizing something. When studying bones, you're looking over your notes and you say to yourself, I've got this because I'm looking over your notes. What you're doing there is recognizing your notes. But on a test, you're going to need to pull the names of the bones out of your brain without your notes. This is retrieval. Retrieval is a lot harder than recognition. Students often think they have something memorized, but their learning is only at recognition and not retrieval. And so then you won't do well on your test. Another way to think about this is shown by this figure. So writing content curve, the 4 stages of learning, you might go to this site. The first one is up here at the top, and this is a graph where knowledge is on the bottom and kind of mood or happiness is on the y-axis. And so if you're right here, you're happy, but you don't have much knowledge. And so in unconscious incompetence, you don't know something, and you don't know that you don't know something. This is when you can't recognize that you're not ready to take an exam. Notice that the emoji is a happy face, and so you're kind of happy in your ignorance or happy in your bliss. Ignorance is bliss. As you move up, you move into conscious incompetence. And that's when you don't know something and you don't know something. Notice the frustrating look. So, frustration because you don't know something, but you are moving up in knowledge. So, this is when you're starting to learn something and you realize that you have a lot to learn. Next is conscious competence, is when you start to learn and you're feeling confident that you will learn what you need to learn. The quizzical emoji basically indicates that you're taking on knowledge and you know you are learning, but you still have to concentrate and think hard in order to show that knowledge. Next is unconscious competence, and this is when you know something so well you don't even have to really think about it. An example would be if you're asked how a muscle interacts with a bone, and you can figure it out because you know the markings where muscles attach to bone, so you can visualize how the muscle moves the bone. I would actually argue too that there's another level here, and that one is when you understand something so well that you can do it automatically and you can teach it to somebody. This is why it's important to learn by explaining, to pull things out of your brain. Einstein reportedly said that you don't understand something until you can explain it to your mom. So, a good practice is to practice teaching what you're learning and pretend that you're explaining it to your mom. Or, another valid way of thinking about this, if you're going into the healthcare field, you're going to have to explain knowledge to your patients. And so, can you explain what's going on to somebody like a patient? Okay, we're over here. Next is interleaving. I interpret this to mean that you take in information in multiple ways. So in anatomy, this could be studying single bones and also studying the skeleton as a whole. Add to that thinking about fractures and how bones interact with muscles. Connecting this to Bloom's taxonomy, interleaving means to conceptualize what you're learning, to see the big picture. Spaced practice is really pretty important. It's to study over time, so don't cram. Many students often dislike cumulative tests, cumulative finals, but this is spaced practice as you're learning your information in the semester, and then you have to review it at the end of the semester. In my experience, returning to the material is key to really learning something for the long term. I think it's also fair to think of spaced practice as studying in a small intervals multiple times a day. This will come up later, but space practice is also using the Pomodoro technique, where you study for 20 minutes and take a 5-minute break, study for 20 minutes and take a 5-minute break, study for 20 minutes and now take a 15-minute break. Dual coding, I interpret this as getting information into your brain multiple ways. Try to record your lectures so that you can read a book as you're listening. Maybe not at the exact same time, but complement reading to audio and visual information. An example that I practice is to create Prezi presentations with a picture of a slide, a text narrative. I record them by voice, and then the Prezi organizes things in kind of a big picture way. So the information is coming into the student's brain in 4 different ways. So use dual coding. I'm realizing that I left one thing off. I don't have it in my little concept map, but I'm going to talk about it. The last strategy from the learning scientist is elaboration. So elaboration means to pay attention to the small details, even as you try to learn a topic. An example is that you make sure you're learning the markings of the bones so that you'll easily learn the names of the bones themselves. Another example is trying to connect 2 different ideas. An example is that learning bones and bone markings will help you understand how a particular muscle works and how it provides movement. Or the principle of form and function is a major concept in all biology and really in A&P. It's basically connecting how something works to how something looks. Getting back to the diagram here, find your flow state. Or basically, your flow state is when you're in a zone. This is kind of a cool figure. So you can go to Wikipedia on flow psychology, and that's where the figure comes from. Your flow state is when it just seems like studying and learning is easy. You've found the best environment, you've found the right time of day, you've learned that listening to music or certain types of tones helps you. You prefer learning in a brightly lit area, or you need more amber light, or do you know you need quiet, so you use noise canceling headphones? Have you gotten enough sleep? Also, feel free to find things that are anecdotal. There might not be science behind all these techniques, but it works for you, and that's all that matters. I personally like to listen to beta rhythms, which is going to come up later. Beta rhythms are what your brain does when it's in a concentration state. Peppermint is thought to be activating. For some reason, apples are like caffeine to me. They're very stimulating. I also think omega-3 fatty acids make me smarter because I know that omega-3 fatty acids help the insulation that's around your neurons so your neurons don't short circuit. These techniques can be completely a hypothesis, but a pretty good measure of your intelligence is reaction time. So Don't be afraid to experiment on yourself. Like I've experimented with myself with omega-3 fatty acids using reaction time. I find that I have a faster reaction time after I've had tuna fish. It's honestly true. So experiment on yourself to find the best situation for you to learn and to find that flow state. Practice various study skills. So find different memory skills like mnemonics. That's a classic memory technique where you take like the first letter of some different list of things that you're supposed to learn and turn it into a sentence. Or another important thing is to pair your current knowledge with the knowledge that you're trying to learn. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Another key thing that is found in the data is retrieval. So trying to review facts and pull it out of your head is more beneficial to learning than rereading your textbook over and over. Pay attention to mastery skills. Mastery skills are skills that help you to transfer those skills to other skills. So mastery skills are skills that help you transfer skills from learning one thing into learning other things. So I think this presentation hopefully will help you increase your ability to learn. If you're just beginning your college career, these efforts to really learn will help you to be a better learner for when you get to your more difficult courses that come later. The next bit of advice is that two of the greatest predictors of success in your classes are, will you study with others and will you communicate with your instructor? Your peers may understand something that you don't understand, and they'll help you get through your sticking points. This is going to come up multiple times in this conversation. Be able to explain something to somebody else. Use tutoring. So a lot of times tutors are students that have already taken the class that you're taking now. So they're well versed in the difficult things, especially if you can get a tutor of somebody that's in nursing or in your program course, because then they really know what you need to know in A&P in order to be successful at the next level. Always talk to your teacher, sorry about the typo, about your expectations. Most teachers are always willing to tell you if you're at expectation or below. And it's good to catch when you're not ready for a test before you take the test rather than after you've taken the test. I don't think I've ever failed a student that's communicated with me regularly so that I was able to make sure that they were at expectation. Figure out your best communication tool as well. So is it text? What is your instructor like? Is it text? Is it email? Is it talking after class or before class? Is it coming to office hours? And this is kind of the same. Try and figure out what your instructor likes the most. Is it Zoom? So again, the greatest predictor of success in A&P is, will you meet with your instructor and will you study with others? Also, there's two papers there. That's kind of a unfortunate author team, but it's White, Brown, and Power are the last names of the three authors. But they published two papers that suggest that the greatest predictor of success at the end of your program course in health sciences is how well you do in A&P. Other learning tools, sorry, that should say, I guess podcast works too. Record your lectures so that you can listen later. Something called a SAMR model that helps you judge if technology is worth the effort that it's going to take to adopt that technology. So is that technology just a replacement? That's a substitution. Does it improve things slightly? That's an augmentation. Does it allow large improvements like a modification? Or does the technology really, really just completely change how things are done? And that's redefining. So for me, reading on an iPad has been redefining because I can highlight the things I want to remember, and the software or the app I use, iAnnotate, will collect everything I highlight and put it into a notebook. And that's kind of makes it efficient for me to learn. When I was in college, I would highlight things and then turn those into notes. I would write out those notes. The iPad does that for me now. The caution here is, don't just use technology as a replacement. Make sure it works for you, because all technology requires some sort of investment in order to maximize your ability to use that technology. I kind of just talked about that. Check out software like Quizlet and Chegg, but make sure that you don't use them too much, because all of us instructors know that A lot of our test questions are on Quizlet, and you're kind of cheating yourself in the long run if you do that. Next up down here is time management. There's so many things that you have to do in class that you need to be dedicated to scheduling your work. Of course, you can use a paper calendar, but I would recommend using a Google Calendar or maybe the calendar that's in your learning management system. For us, it's Talon, because then that calendar is always everywhere and you're not going to lose it. A good strategy is to pretend that college is a part-time job. You probably need to set aside 10 to 20 hours per week per class. Schedule your studying time just like you would schedule your job. When you're in your program courses, it's probably going to take 3 to 5 hours per class per day, and that's going to be 20 to 30 hours a week, maybe 40. It's best to break your study materials down into chunks. And I mentioned this before, one of the best ways to do that is the Pomodoro technique, where you study for a certain amount of time, take a break, study, break, study, and then a longer break. I like this app myself. It's called Productivity Timer. It kind of calls you like a slacker if you haven't been studying. And so it's kind of funny that way. The thing about breaking things this way is you won't constantly get up and go to the fridge. You can only go to the fridge, or you can only check your text messages when you're on a break. So it helps you to focus a little bit more. So it also makes sure that your brain takes breaks, because your brain uses glucose. And if you keep just studying without taking breaks, there's less glucose in your brain to feed your neurons. And so you're working harder, but getting less done. Though it is interesting that you're smarter when you're hungry, and that kind of makes sense from an evolutionary point of view, that if you're starving, you want to get smarter so you can catch your next meal. There's a signal that's released by your stomach. It's called ghrelin. It's released when you're hungry, and it goes up and stimulates your brain. Kind of mentioned this already. Pomodoro keeps you on task. Set aside study time every week, and I kind of already said this. Another tool I use, it's not really robust, but it's efficient for short to-do lists. It's called Google Keep. It's not real complex. It only allows 2 levels of outline, so you can't make multiple nested outlines, but it's kind of convenient for, like, I keep it to tell me what do I want to do for the day. I want to take my blood sugar. It reminds me at night to take my blood glucose. You can also have what's called like a parking lot, which is goals or to-do lists that are kind of that you want to keep track of. So that's Google Keep. Next, I'm going to talk about Evernote later, but I wanted to mention Prezi. What Prezi gets you is, like, if there's something that you want to keep track of over the long term, where you want to collect lots of information, and this is where I really like Prezi. So I think about teaching quite a bit in student success. And anytime I learn something new about student success, I put it into this particular Prezi. So it's a way for me to keep track of critical thinking skills, efficiencies of learning, motivation, technology skills, instruction informed by collaboration with all shareholders, social collaboration techniques, retention techniques. The cool thing about it is you can go so deep because it's very nested. So what do I think are the important things for retention? And that is retention, keeping students successful in my classes, but also having them retain information. And it takes like efficiency of learning, organization, flexibility, communication. So I've maintained this Prezi for probably 15 years now, 10, 15 years now. And it's anytime I learn something new or I want to think about something like critical thinking skills, I put it in my Prezi. Kind of mentioned this before. Use podcasts so that you can use audio and text at the same time. But the other thing about podcasts is that you can study while your hands are busy, but your brain is free. Another technique, why I like Prezi, I won't show you, but Prezi allows you to, at least the way I create prezzies, is all of my content will fit on, it's broken into chunks that will fit on a phone screen. So try and find ways to get things onto your phone or so that you can study while you're waiting for your kid to get done with soccer practice and things like that. So you need to be able to study in the small moments. And so that's another aspect of time management. It's probably best to study 20 times a day in 15 to 20-minute intervals if that's what you need to do. Don't try and sit down for 3 or 4 hours at a time the day before the test. That's not good time management. Next up is content management. In order to learn information, you have to process it and make it your own. A key first is organization. You can see the website up here, but I really took in a lot of knowledge from this write-up because I really like this figure. What it shows, this figure, if you take it back to Bloom's, remember the highest form of learning is creativity. The lowest form is rote learning, so memorizing things. The key to getting from rote learning to creative productions is to go through meaningful learning, which requires organization. You can't really learn something until it's organized. So I should have showed this. I like this figure as a teacher. We have rote learning over here versus meaningful learning. And then are you just taking in information or are you learning how to learn on your own? And this is where things like concept mapping, kind of what I'm doing right now, is at the highest form of meaningful learning and learning on your own. So it shows the intersection of meaningful learning and autonomous learning. This would involve creative motivations like putting knowledge together into a story. Continually simplify and condense information, whether that's taking your notes and turning them into flashcards, making outlines, making concept maps. You want to make your information more organized. So I use Google Keep when I have small to-do lists. When I have longer things to do, I keep those in Evernote. I don't want to give away too many of my notes, but you can see here that I can take audio notes. So this is really cool because Evernote, you just push a button on your phone on the app and you can record audio, and then I'm accessing that audio right now on my computer at home. So the cool thing about Evernote is there's lots of ways to get information into your notebooks and then lots of different ways that you can get into your notebooks to get information out. So that's Evernote. I'm going to combine these two. I use Word outlines with hyperlinks. And so I use these things called success outlines. I have a lot of teaching materials. This is my first outline for success in the first unit of A&P1. And so in order to make it easier for students to find my PowerPoints or my Prezzies or my YouTubes, I can use hyperlinks. And so that's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is something called Dropbox. Dropbox is where you can keep files. A cool thing about them is you can access them on your phone, on your iPad, your computer, any computer in the world, and get to like your notes pages. So this outline is a way for students to get to my YouTube videos, or if they want to get to the YouTube on chemistry, then they just click on that. So it's another way to keep notes and then also collect a lot of different types of media in one place where you can get access to. Next is to find the best method that works for you for taking notes. Cornell method is pretty common, but Wikipedia has a bunch of different reviews on how to take notes. I mean, I prefer a mind map or a concept map. This is Cornell Notes. So you divide your paper up into things you want to remember, where you're taking your notes first, and then you'll also write a summary at the bottom. That one's a pretty famous technique. I like concept mapping. That's what this whole thing is a concept map. And you can see that I've got a lot of information in place that I can quickly zoom in and zoom out so I can capture all that information. Figure out the best way to memorize things. Again, use mnemonics. So Wikipedia has a lot of different techniques for mnemonics. Um, I find, and somebody taught me this when I was in college, if you look at your notes before you go to bed and you look at your notes in the morning, which is really hard to do, to hit your alarm clock, well, first of all, set it for 15 minutes earlier, roll over after you've hit your alarm clock and look at your notes. But you can memorize a lot of information if you bracket your sleep by looking at your notes before you go to bed and after you wake up. It's really incredible how much you can memorize. Make your studying efficient. Um, I find that binaural waves, and again, this is completely anecdotal, but if it's anecdotal but it works, then what do you care if it's scientific? I mean, of course, we need to care about science, but when it's personal like that, you don't really, as long as it's working, it's working. And so I subscribe to My Noise, but the place I usually go is binaural beats. I mean, the hypothesis might have a little bit of truth to it that your brain has four different brain waves. So it has alpha when you're kind of resting, beta when you're concentrating, theta is mainly just found in kids, and delta is when you're sleeping. And so I'll play a delta rhythm, a beta rhythm, and I'll play it in the background underneath music, and it just seems to activate my brain. I think it's just a like high pitched, rapid tone keeps my brain awake. Again, if it's not scientific, but it works, who cares? Figure out the best time of day for you to study. Study in pauses of the day. Again, back to Pomodoro. There's a lot of controversy about learning styles. So learning styles are interpersonal, musical, kinesthetic, so how your body moves. Existential would be like having a calm mindfulness kind of thing. Or David Kolb is another guy that has described different learning styles. Or again, Wikipedia is your friend. I don't care if there's instructors that say that it's not sourced and things like that. Of course it's sourced. Look at all the blue numbers. But there's a lot of different ways to do learning styles. And I'll tell you that there are scientific studies that show that there is something to learning styles. And there's science studies that say learning styles don't matter. You shouldn't necessarily teach a visual learner in a visual technique because it doesn't help them learn anymore. I mean, that could be just that the science isn't finding the result. I would always say that there's a reason why we teach kids to learn their ABCs to song. There is something about learning styles. Next up is critical thinking skills, and it's something you just always want to work on. So I once sat down, um, I'll confess, there's probably a solid halfway into where I'm now into my teaching career. So probably 7 years into my teaching before I actually defined what I thought critical thinking is you ask like a teacher what they're teaching. And they'll often say I'm teaching critical thinking skills, but you ask them to define that, and that's pretty hard to define. And I never really defined it honestly for quite a few years into my teaching. So I sat down at one point and I said, well, I'm going to try and combine the scientific method, Bloom's taxonomy, the cognitive domain. I'm sorry, bad color choice, but this says Bloom's knowledge domain. And then there is another Bloom's called the affective domain. And so the affective domain is here in the middle, and then it goes to knowledge domain, cognitive domain, and then the scientific method. And what I came up with was ask a question, use good sources, use good reasoning, like don't fall into logical fallacies like confirmation bias is when you tend to believe more into things that you already believe in. So it's kind of like certain political minded people will listen to their favorite news station because it kind of reflects back their own personal already held beliefs. Value social collaboration because two brains are always better than one. And also, like I said, study in groups because one person may have the knowledge and they can explain it better than an instructor can explain it because that person, that student, that peer, colleague, student, study buddy is actually closer to the process of learning this new information, whereas your instructor learned this a long time ago. See the big picture is what I have here, and then ask a better question. Anyway, that's what I think critical thinking is ask questions, use digital literacy to find answers, avoid logical fallacies. This is a really good, if you just look up logical fallacies, you'll find this one. So appeal to authority, things like that. You want to avoid logical fallacies. Use social collaboration. Conceptualize, see the big picture. Don't just see facts, see the story. And then ask a better question. That's critical thinking. Next is to learn how to show your knowledge. And the main way I'm thinking about this is in test taking techniques. So, what I've come up with over the years in order to help students become better test takers is first, you can't surrender to the idea that you're not a good test taker. Knowledge only counts if you can demonstrate it to somebody else. So the first thing you want to do is relax. Cortisol is a hormone and it comes up with stress management up later. But cortisol is released by your brain when you're stressed out. And evolutionarily, what it does is it calms you down under high stress. So you can see this, unfortunately, in the animal world where an animal is about to get attacked and it will just kind of go limp. And that's cortisol telling the animal to just kind of dumb themselves down so they don't realize how bad things are. And cortisol does this to a lot of people in a test. You dumb yourself down right at the beginning of the test. Cortisol literally goes to your brain and dumbs you down. Use all of your time when you take a test. So the best time to add mental toughness is when you're taking the test because you're already stressed out. It's kind of like the hardest mile of a 5 mile run is the last mile. And that's also the most important mile for helping you to get more strength. So use your A&P tests to get better for future tests because everyone that's listening to this is probably going to have to take a boards exam someday. And you're going to be amazed at how hard a boards exam is compared to any other test you've taken. The dumbest I've ever felt in my life was the day I took the GRE to get into grad school. When you're taking tests, don't fall into the unfamiliar trap, which is a lot of people say, I don't recognize that word, so that must be the answer. Have a test taking mindset. So be a killer when it comes to tests. Kind of imagine a little bit of a competition between you and your instructor. So you take your test with a little bit of aggression. If you're taking your test on paper, I can't really think unless I'm drawing or I'm holding something in my hand. And so when I take a test, I write all over it. Hopefully, if you're taking a test on a computer, you're allowed to use scratch paper so you can still write. If you're taking a multiple choice question, you kind of want to hope to get to the answer before you look at the options, the distractors. So answer each question in your mind, if you can, before reading the possible answers. And that's when you also want to write, okay, this is the answer I'm going to say, and then I'm going to hope to look for that answer in the various options. The distractors, they're called distractors for a reason because they confuse your brain. And so you want to get through those if you can, or you want to get to the answer before you actually get to the distractors and the confusion. A key thing about tests, especially boards tests, is they really like to use negative questions. Which of the following is not, or of the following which is not true? And so you want to circle, again, if it's on paper, circle the qualifying words so you don't get down to C and all of a sudden forget that you're looking for the not answer and you suddenly are finding you circle an answer that's the wrong answer because it's the right answer. Since many statements, ideas, principles, and rules have exceptions, be careful in selecting your items that contain such words as best, always, all, no, never, none, entirely, completely, all of which suggest that a condition exists without exception. I see this a lot, is some people have convinced themselves not to change their answers. This is confirmation bias. You remember every time you changed an answer and got it wrong. You don't remember all the times you changed an answer and got it right. I always advocate going through a test multiple times, not only because then maybe you can use question 15. Question 15 has some knowledge that will help you on question 2, but also it allows you to think through multiple times. Multiple choice is as much about elimination as it is about picking the right answer. A lot of students take the test just looking for the right answer, but you want to go through the other answers too and identify to yourself why they're wrong. So good test takers analyze why they think an answer is correct and why they think all the other distractors are incorrect. And this again is going to be really important when you take boards exams, because for nursing students at least, they take the NCLEX and there's a lot of choose all that apply. So it could be C, D, and F are the right answers, which means you have to be able to say A is right or wrong, B is right or wrong, C is right or wrong. Also, there might be choose the best answer. That's a difficult one because you might have an answer that's technically correct, but it's not as good as another answer. And here I kind of already mentioned this. Go through the test multiple times because you might be able to use one question against another, or if you have multiple choice and essays, maybe the multiple choice will help you on the essay, or maybe the essay will help you on a multiple choice. So I always recommend take a first pass through the test and get the easy questions. On the second pass, get the rest of the questions. And then the third pass, you just kind of want to review one last time. Test taking is about finding your weakness and improving. That's why we have lots of tests in A&P. So everyone has different weaknesses. So search for test taking techniques. I've certainly given you some here, but there's a whole lot more. So search that out. Key thing is to simplify the complex. Again, it's a point I've made multiple times, is you don't understand something until you can explain it to somebody else. So when you're taking your test, pretend that you're explaining your answers. Next up is find your motivation. I saw this figure once. I liked it quite a bit. The key is to avoid procrastination and get motivated. Basically, it has three main things you need to have to be motivated. You need to have value, see value. You need to have expectancy. I'm getting something out of this. And basically fight impulsiveness, so decrease impulsiveness. I'm not going to go through this figure in detail, but it's at alexvermeer.com, and I find it kind of valuable. I don't know if I can zoom in anymore. A little bit. But it's things like compete against yourself, compete against others, turn it into a game, things like that. I think it has some value for motivation. At least in community college, you want to be aware of something called Maslow's hierarchy, if you haven't seen it before. So look it up on Wikipedia. It basically says that if you don't have these bottom things met, you're never going to get these top ones done, like self-actualization. And in this case, self-actualization would be to be getting an A or do really well in school. I see this at the community college level as you're working too many hours, or I've had students that they just have too much going on in their life to be successful in the class at that point, and you're better off just taking the semester off and getting your life in order, getting your needs met before you can be successful in school. Think different. Obviously, not asking you all to be Miles Davis or Hugo Chavez or Amelia Earhart, John Lennon, Einstein, Picasso, James Watson, Gandhi, Jim Henson, and Jane Goodall. But what I guess I'm trying to say is, again, back to those higher level of blooms. These people were way in the high level of blooms because they're really, really, really creative. And I throw in Richard Feynman because he was someone that taught physics in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. He actually became famous because he figured out what happened to the Challenger shuttle. But he's a guy that could explain how light is both a particle and a wave, so quantum electrodynamics. He could explain curved space. He had a really great ability to take complex physics and make it into aha moments. So find the aha. Use science. You might want to look at. It's basically a way. It's kind of like a career advice kind of program. So you're not going to be motivated to be a nurse if it's just not something that's in the career choice. It doesn't fit your career choice goals. Then I have John Wooden here. What I'm trying to do is these are two people. So I have Richard Feynman and John Wooden in here because they're two people that I personally am highly motivated by. They're my mentors. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is pick a mentor. It doesn't even have to be a mentor that you know or that you see. It can be someone out there that is just famous and they really speak to you. And so John Wooden is no, I don't remember the details exactly, but he won like 9 straight NCAA basketball championships, which is really unheard of. And he had won like 11 total, something like that. Anyway, he came up with his Wooden on leadership, and it's just something that speaks to me. So, DJ, why are you doing this? It's to basically say, find somebody that motivates you. And two of the people that really motivate me are Richard Feynman and John Wooden. I'm trying to tap into your intrinsic motivation. That's rewards that come from within. And you're only going to get so far if you're demanding extrinsic motivation or external rewards. The way I talk about this to my students is if you're in this pathway because you're chasing a piece of paper, which is certificates or a check, you're not going to get very far because that's extrinsic motivation. You kind of want to be the kind of person that enjoys helping people in nursing. You're going to get further that way. Another thing along those lines are you can't get very far with what and how. You need to know the why of why you're studying something. Next up is to have a growth mindset. Carol Dweck wrote a book entitled Mindset. You can fulfill your potential. And the basic premise is to see failure as a growth. You should see your classes as opportunities to improve your learning. You're going to fail. You're going to fail one time or another. You got to see those failures as rising you up. So, building you up, you can't see failures as something that's constantly weighing you down. So, here's Carol Dweck's mindset if you're interested. Always seek growth. Failure is a process. There's this idea in yoga to push gently up against the wall. So, find your limits and try and strengthen them. I know this is kind of dorky, but I used to coach my daughters in softball and soccer, and my motto was always find your 100%. So find that you are absolutely doing the best that you can be doing, and then try and push it just a little bit more. Find your limits, and then raise your limits. A good way to improve your learning is to improve your reading, and you can do this in several ways. So as you read, ask questions. Remember that asking questions is key to critical thinking. So ask and answer questions about your reading material. That's also called elaborative interrogation. When you're reading, pay attention and maximize your environment. So I personally need to listen to a certain type of music. It can't be something I haven't heard. It's got to be music I've heard a lot already. Or if you need silence, get yourself noise canceling headphones. I like bright white light. Some people like more of a yellow or amber light. Again, try and experiment on what in your environment makes you perform at your best. Preview the reading by browsing the key points. So one of the things you should probably do, and somebody told me this when I was in college and it really worked, is the first time you read material, don't have any expectation of learning anything. So a lot of students will just go sentence by sentence, expecting themselves to understand the first time through sentence by sentence. But it's probably best to just read through the first time and don't really hold yourself up if something doesn't make sense. Because what your brain is doing is it's picking out the tough parts. It also is laying out sort of a map already. So preview your reading and don't expect to learn anything the first time through. break reading into sections. Again, that's Pomodoro. A technique I would use in college is if I was studying PowerPoints, I'd put a pencil mark next to each slide that I didn't understand. So if I understood a slide, no pencil mark. If I didn't understand a slide, pencil mark. And then I'd go through the PowerPoints a second time, and now I did kind of know some of the things that had pencil marks, so I'd erase the pencil marks. So I'd go through the PowerPoint maybe 4 or 5 times, but each time I went through them, I was studying less information. It's really cool that now they have erasable highlighters, so I can see that you could highlight your book, and then as you know something, you just erase that highlighting. So you're constantly distilling down the information that you're learning. And then you're going to turn that highlighting into notes. Review, summarize, and discuss is important. So you want to teach yourself again by reviewing what you've learned, summarize it, and hopefully discuss it with somebody else. This is one way that the Pomodoro is good, is you're taking breaks, and so it's helping you catch when you're just reading without understanding, when it's just one ear in one ear and out the other. A technique that allows people to really, really read fast is to read while they're listening to an audiobook. So try and listen and read at the same time if you can, or ideally, you want to record your lectures so that you can listen to the lecture as you read through your notes. We're almost there because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Everyone has heard of different techniques for stress management, different types of music, try meditation. I call this like finding your crucibles. So nature's crucibles for me are, a crucible to me is something where it's really distilled down into something that helps you to rebuild yourself and give yourself strength. And for some reason, nature walks and looking over water like a lake or a creek or something like that just really kind of buoys me. So find those things in your life that really help to refresh you quickly. Looking at sunrises, I'm not a morning person, but I used to have to teach early in the morning, and there was nothing like watching the sun come up. It just always picked up my mood. Practice mindfulness, talk to somebody. And again, don't be afraid to write out. I have a long list of what my crucibles are, and so if I'm feeling stressed, I can go to my list of crucibles. It's in Evernote, and I can refresh myself. The last section is to play the infinite game. I'd highly recommend a book. I don't think, there it is. Called Finite and Infinite Games, A Vision of Life, Play, and Possibility by James Carse. This book was transformative for me because what a finite game is a game you win or lose. An infinite game is where you just try to improve. And it has lots of deep meanings because it's like the difference between society and culture. Um, Infinite games are people that enjoy art, and it's also higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy is an infinite game, so creativity. So it's also intrinsic motivation is an infinite game. So you want to take on your learning because you like to learn, not because you're interested in a grade. A grade is a finite game. An infinite game is learning how to learn. Constantly remind yourself of why you're seeking your education, and it shouldn't be just about a paycheck. Just thinking of a grade is finite thinking. You want to have a culture of learning. Learn to be a lifelong learner. Again, college is not about facts, it's about skills. Don't think school is only deadlines. Think in terms of I'm trying to learn what, how, and why. And then, of course, this video, the intent of this video is to help you to play the infinite game, to get better at what you're doing and learning how to learn so that learning comes easier in your future classes and learning becomes deeper in your future classes. That's it. Thank you.